One of the researchers who studies trust in work is Paul Zak, and I love this quote. He says, "Joy on the job comes from doing purpose-driven work with a trusted team." So we want to make sure that purpose is clear, but we also want to help teams build trust with each other, because that's the other part of the secret sauce.
Hey friends, welcome to the Changing Work podcast. We are so glad you're here.
My name is Nick.
And I'm Scott.
And this is the podcast where we talk about changing work from the inside out.
So if you're into making the workplace and the world a better experience via conscious business practices, stick around. This is for you.
Hello, Britt.
Hi, Nicholas. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for being here. I have been waiting for this opportunity to talk with you. So much of the work that you're doing is so closely aligned to the work that I do as a coach with my clients. So I was just really excited to get a chance to dive deep into a lot of your YouTube videos and everything else that you have going on out there in the world. And we'll get to all that in just a second, but I'm going to do one of those awkward things where I read your bio in front of you and you get to sit and listen to me read it to you. But what I've been asking everybody else to do is, as I read this, if you have anything else that you'd like to share, maybe something that isn't encapsulated in your in your bio that people should know about you. Just give a little thought to that while I'm reading your bio for everybody else. So Dr. Britt Andreotta is an internationally recognized thought leader who uses her background in leadership, neuroscience, and psychology, and education to create science-based solutions for today's workplace challenges. Britt is the former CLO for lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning, and has over 10 million views worldwide on her online courses. She regularly consults with organizations on leadership development and learning strategy. Britt is the author of several books, many of which I have checked out, and they're awesome, on the brain science of success, including Wired to Grow, Wired to Resist, and Wired to Connect. In 2022, she was named the top 10 influencer in learning. And in 2021, she was the top 20 learning influencer and a top 20 HR influencer for leadership development. Britt, welcome.
Thank you, Nicholas. Something not on my bio. I'm a cat person. I've got 2 kitties. I have a teenager who is getting ready to apply to colleges, and just kind of loving life. I'm loving that spring is starting to abound around the country, and we have some good things to look forward to.
That's fantastic. I knew I liked you for some reason. I'm also a cat person, so we have a lot there in common as well. Well, let's get right into it. We have a lot to cover here. And first of all, I'm just really curious, like, what brought you to this work? What inspired you to start working in this particular domain and area?
You know, I started looking at the brain science of things when I became the chief learning officer at Lynda, and I wanted to just become better at my craft and designing learning for other people. And so I did kind of a deep dive into the research, and I was really astounded by what was there. So that became a talk, and then it became a book. And I thought that was it. And then we were acquired by LinkedIn, and I was certified in all the change management tools, and none of them were working. And I realized, I wonder what neuroscience says about change. So that became book number 2. And then I realized that there was kind of a need for this, for someone with a scientific background to really translate the latest research. So I've got 2 more books out, and one's on teams, and the one we're going to talk about today is all about purpose and meaningful work. But what I find is that humans are wired in certain ways, and a lot of the ways we set up our workplaces goes against human biology, and then we wonder why things don't turn out as we had hoped. So I'm kind of on a mission to really bring that knowledge, but also give people actionable takeaways that they can use right away.
That's fantastic. So, you know, the title here, The Science of Finding Your Purpose and Creating Meaningful Work. I mean, that's a big statement right there by itself. Tell me a little bit, like, when you say purpose and when you say meaning or meaningful work, like, what are we actually talking about there?
Well, the research really talks about this difference between happiness and purpose. So let me articulate that difference first. A lot of ancient scholars really studied that there were these 2 types of well-being. And one is called hedonic well-being. It's kind of that happiness or pleasure attainment. It's really that immediate sense of joy or pleasure we get from something such as eating a good piece of chocolate cake. And then there's this other type called eudaimonic well-being, which results from striving toward meaning, purpose, potential, self-realization. And it's really more long-term, right? It's not something that's always immediately satisfactory, but it does create that deeper sense of fulfillment or satisfaction. And so we really need both. If people have too much happiness, but not enough purpose or meaning, they're out of whack and they feel it. And if they've got too much purpose and meaning and not enough pleasure and happiness, they also feel out of balance. So we really need both to be healthy. And the research is really quite clear that there's a lot of physical, mental health benefits and even community benefits when people are living a life of purpose. So it's really important for us to explore this. And of course, because of the pandemic, a lot of people were driven to this reflection for themselves. They had a lot of time to kind of contemplate, and they were also really faced with their mortality. And so we were thrown into a worldwide simultaneous values clarification experience, which is why we're seeing people's hunger for purpose and meaning increase so significantly around the planet.
That makes a lot of sense. So maybe we could drill down in this a little bit deeper. When we say purpose, what do we really mean by purpose? Because that sounds like a pretty big word, and maybe it's a little lofty, maybe hard to reach for folks. But it sounds like in what you're describing, it's something that you can actually put into practice almost on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so purpose and meaning are kind of intertwined. You're going to hear people use those two terms similarly. Purpose is that sense of kind of having a North Star. It's usually driven by your core values, and it's the contribution you want to make. It's always in service of others. So purpose is always self-transcendent, where happiness is really self-focused. So again, we need that balance, but it's how you want to be of service to others. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily working for some really lofty nonprofit. It can be that you are a really excellent baker and you want to bring the joy of baked goods to people's lives. Or maybe you really care about folks having everything that they need in front of them. And so you work in operations because you really want to support people feeling, you want to create an environment where people feel supported. So a sense of purpose is that thing that we want to do to support others. And then meaning is kind of intertwined there because we all are raised with a value system that is instilled in us by the adults around us. And so what is given meaning is definitely influenced. So some of us at young ages were nudged away from or towards certain things because our family of origin gave it certain meaning as being valuable or not valuable, worthy or not worthy. So I think part of our journey as adults sometimes is realizing that maybe what we were told is not aligned with what we feel or what we're experiencing. And oftentimes adults come back to something that was true when they were little, that they've kind of always known about themselves, but they've been talked out of for a good portion of their lives.
Gosh, I really love that you put a point on that. This is something that I've experienced myself and also my clients is like a lot of times after like a job loss or a layoff or a big transition, you do this self-evaluation. And so many of the times these are the things I put down or things that I walked away from in order to focus on my career or this other thing, which maybe had higher meaning. Is that something that you also encounter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, humans are on this journey, and a lot of our young adulthood, our childhood and then young adulthood is kind of pleasing others and trying to make them happy. It's also a big core need that we have to belong in a community. And we feel when we're starting to be ostracized or marginalized. And so we're biologically wired to care what people think. And we're biologically wired to try to please the community that we're closest to. But oftentimes that takes us away from our true selves. And so I think the journey of adulthood is really trying on different careers, finding which type of boss really supports you and resonates with you, looking at the values you were raised with and seeing if they're really the ones that you want to have or that you believe in. I also like to introduce people to this idea that meaning exists on a continuum, that meaning for each of us, there's kind of meaningful to meaningless. But there was kind of three areas when we think about particularly if work is meaningful to us. There's meaning of work, which is how you perceive the overall concept of work. And that's usually very influenced by your parents and your teachers when you're a child. Then there's meaning in work, or how meaningful work is to you specifically. And that's usually where you start to find a career path. Like I've always loved education and helping others grow. And so I've always kind of had a career in that lane, although I've had different jobs within that. And then there's meaning at work, which is more narrowly defined to the context of this specific job at this particular organization. So when people are struggling, and I'm sure you find this too, Nicholas, when you're coaching people, is that sometimes they're teasing out those differences. Like, am I done with this lane? Is this career path no longer for me? Or is it this boss or this company that's no longer the match? And I need to be staying in my lane, but looking to do that work somewhere else. And of course, during the pandemic, we saw, for example, big swaths of healthcare workers and teachers leave their lane entirely. Like, they've left the entire industry and moved into a different one because they got so burned out during the conditions that they had to work in during the pandemic. So you also can take something that you love and get burned out on it and no longer find meaning in it, or not be able to deal with the burnout that you experienced with it.
Yeah. And imagine too, and this is something I hear from a lot of clients, particularly after job loss or a big rupture in their career, and perhaps they're looking for work and struggling to find that work. I was literally chatting with somebody earlier today. They were like, work is so important to me. I have trouble like formulating my sense of self without actually working. So just getting a job, any job at this point, is better than not having one. What's going on there with folks? Is that first category of like the meaning of work kind of more universally for them and how it plays a role in their life?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. We definitely are a society that's built on capitalism. And so having a job and earning money and money is how we buy food, water, and shelter. So there is very present survival benefits to having a job because you can earn money. But in addition, a lot of people now get their sense of purpose from their jobs, particularly as religiosity has gone down, and we can track that over the last 100 years or so. More and more people want to find their sense of meaning in work because it's where we spend so much of our lives. And then the other really interesting thing that happened historically is when we moved from being an agrarian society to more industrial, it used to be that the work that we did, we could see the impact. We baked for our neighbors. We fixed shoes for our neighbors. We grew food for our neighbors. And so you could see the impact you were having. But when we moved to an industrial society and that shift, 2/3 of the workforce shift in a period of only 40 years. Wow. And now we're working for somebody else, not near our neighbors, often unable to see the impact of our work, and for other people whose goals we were trying to satisfy. That shift meant that people felt a disconnection from the value of their work. And we're really seeing people want more of that now, that they're really hungering to see the direct impact of the work that they're having. Again, the pandemic really accelerated it, but it was in place before. So I think all those things are in the mix. And then add to that generation, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, even though they're 0 through 10 years old right now, really focus on purpose and meaning. It's something that they want to have.
So this brings up a lot of questions for me. This idea of purpose. Imagine there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths about what we're actually talking about when we're using that word. What are some things that come up for you around that?
Yeah, I wrote a whole chapter about the myths that people have about purpose. So a few of the common ones are, it has to be super worthy. Like, everyone has to see this as like a really worthy cause for it to be purpose and meaningful. And like I mentioned, it's where you want to be of service to others. So you can find a sense of purpose and meaning in anything, but sometimes people discount stuff because they're like, oh, I'm not working for a nonprofit, or I'm not working for some big societal issue. Another myth is that you're going to have a sudden revelation and it becomes clear to you. And that happens for some people, but more often than not, for many of us, it's a slow journey of discovery. Oh, I kind of liked this. Oh, I didn't like that. That was kind of cool. And so over time, it becomes more clear. Certainly as we age, our values can shift too. Another one is that living your purpose is easy, that once you find it, it's going to be puppies and rainbows. And it's not. Oftentimes working towards your purpose is hard work. Sometimes it's really frustrating. It will give you that sense of meaning that you're accomplishing something and that you're contributing to something, but it's not always easy. And that's why you do need to then have happiness and balance it out, because not every day is going to be fantastic. And probably the last one, I mean, there's several, but the last one I'd mention is that once you find it, that's it. And that's going to be your purpose for the rest of your life. And that's not true either. We do change and shift as we grow. Life happens to us. We can burn out a sense of purpose and need to find another one. We can experience a tragedy and all of a sudden something else becomes much more important. So it's a journey. It's a journey that we're always on.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? So, I wonder too, what are some of the signs that we can look out for either in ourselves or in other people when we know that somebody's actually fulfilling their potential?
Yeah, the cool thing about potential is that humans are wired to learn and grow. It's kind of part of our DNA. And you'll see this in, we set goals and you work hard and you achieve that goal and you celebrate for maybe a few days. And then what's the next thing we do? We set a new goal. So we're always kind of striving to do the next level of our potential. And as we fulfill our potential, then there's a new horizon, which is our new level of potential we can aim for. So I think when we look for others, it's, are they in an environment that supports their ability to fulfill the potential? Are they getting coached and mentored? Are there opportunities to grow? It is one of the things employees look for now is, do I have opportunities to learn and grow? Will I be coached and mentored in the job? We also can look at the effort that we put into something. Do we strive for it? Do we practice? Do we struggle a little bit? Those are the things that help us move forward and feel like we're achieving that potential. Another place to look for is if someone's really kind of blocked or locked down. And again, I would think you'd see this in your work as a coach, is that people can get really stopped by, I love Brene Brown's term for this, the shame gremlins, right? Where someone told you this isn't valuable or you shouldn't do that, or something happened to you and you're holding a lot of shame. And so you don't think you're worthy of this opportunity. So sometimes your potential is right there, but you've got to handle some of the old wounds and let those go so that you can really step into the future that you deserve.
And that's big work right there, I think, too. Like so many of the people that I talk to, like when they're trying to pursue something meaningful or purposeful in their lives, that's the things, like the gremlins that keep coming up, those negative self-talk and some of those older stories aren't serving them anymore. This makes me also think that there's probably like some, I've heard in some of your other videos and some of the other work that you've done, this idea of like paradoxes with purpose. Tell us a little bit about that, or what are some of those common paradoxes that people might run into when doing these explorations?
Yeah, so a paradox is, that things don't align. There's a little bit of a conflict there. So one of the common paradoxes is that our sense of purpose and meaning is deeply personal to each of us, and yet it's totally shaped and controlled by others, right? So your parents told you what was worthy and what wasn't. You were encouraged or you were smushed. You may have a real clear sense of purpose, but your boss won't let you do it. It's controlled by others. And so it's this weird thing that it's deeply personal, and yet oftentimes you cannot achieve it on your own. And then you have to navigate all these other things. The second paradox is that there's a dark side to purpose, that some people who feel really, really committed, and this is often for difficult issues like working on, genocide or abuse, or where they really feel like they're saving the lives of another community. The paradox is then there's no time to rest. If I take my vacation, who's going to get harmed? If I look away for a second, we're going to lose traction. And so oftentimes the dark side of purpose is that people who are really gripped by purpose will work themselves to harmful excesses. And there's also some boundary management issues, not really being able to have a firm boundary with the workplace. And it also harms personal relationships that then you can't fully have the romantic relationships that you want because this other thing is always taking precedence. So that's another one of the paradoxes. A third one has to do with the fact that it does ebb and flow over time, that once you find your purpose and it's meaningful and you're feeling so great about it, it doesn't always stay forever. And again, I would point to healthcare workers. There's one theory that talks about, if we have a matrix of how much supply of kind of meaningful work there is for you to do, and your need for that supply, that there's a matrix, and you want to be kind of in this flow zone right in the middle, that it's the perfect amount of how much you need. And even within healthcare, there's a variation. Like some people really thrive in the emergency room kind of environment or doing, intense surgeries. And other people are like, no, I want to provide healthcare, but that's that's too much. Well, what happened with all of the healthcare workers is because of the pandemic and the fact that we didn't have treatments or vaccines yet, they all worked to excess. The supply of purposeful work far exceeded their need, and they literally burned themselves out. And it would have probably balanced out if they weren't in those conditions for so long. But you can take something and overdo it or underdo it. So I also like for people to kind of evaluate how much purpose and meaning do I need in my daily or weekly life? And then what do I get from this job? And then is it in alignment, or do you need to tinker somewhere?
Yeah, to me, that just sounds like this really good rubric to kind of assess and kind of contemplate like where you're fitting. And this idea that, you're always kind of shifting and moving. I think a lot of times people maybe feel like it's like a set it and forget it kind of a thing. It's like, oh, I'm on this track. I've been doing this for like X amount of years. This feels like what I had agreed upon, 10 years ago. And there's this tension that occurs where there's shifts and changes in what they need and, what their values are. And maybe then there's like this kind of muting of the truth for themselves, where like they maybe won't skip into something new, or they won't explore new things because they feel like they've got it locked down over in this other area. Is that a phenomenon that you witness?
Yeah, and there's also kind of the sunk cost phenomenon, right? Like I started off my career as an academic. I was in higher ed, I was a professor, I was a dean, I was eventually moving up to vice chair, and I'd spent 20 years in that career. And I all of a sudden realized it wasn't what I wanted anymore. And I was actually achieving the pinnacle I'd been going for, but something had shifted in me when I realized the higher up I went, the more I lost connection with students and watching people shift and grow and learn. And that was the thing that actually really mattered to me. And that's when I made the leap over to lynda.com, and I went more fully into learning space, was that I realized, oh, that's the thing that matters. So, but I've seen a lot of people say, well, I've gone this far, I'm not changing my career now. Like I'm about to achieve the thing I've always wanted. But I literally was waking up and with nightmares going, this isn't right anymore. And so I think we also have to, the cool thing about human bodies is they give us hints. You will not feel right. You will be stressed. You will not be able to sleep. You may be struggling with anxiety and depression. Those are all clues that are worth paying attention to. Our body does give us signs when we're not on the right path. So I think it's important to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something here I think that's really important to highlight too, is like a lot of times people end up getting to the pinnacle of their career or getting to the pinnacle of whatever their purpose was, and they find themselves feeling unfulfilled or otherwise like out of alignment in some way. And that can often cause this bit of disillusionment of like, well, what comes next? Like now I don't know what to do. In your work, is there a process or a methodology that you recommend to help people kind of re-ground on what's important to them?
Part of when I wrote this book, this particular book, Wired to Become, is half all the science, and then it's half workbook. Like it really turned into, I'm going to share with you what some science says and what some models are, now journal about it. And so I actually share several models of meaningful work and several kind of theories, and I encourage people to kind of try each one on and see what insights it gives them. But I do think it's important to kind of evaluate. The work that I love in this book is the Hudson model of the cycle of renewal. Because we do go through these cycles where we're kind of gathering ideas and we're kind of contemplating, and then we launch something and we have all this energy building it and growing it. But it absolutely is natural that then the next phase you move into is the doldrums, where things kind of stall out and you've lost your energy and maybe it's not so clear. And then what do you do to, re-engage? Sometimes you just need to make a slight shift and you can re-engage with that initial dream. And sometimes it's time to now shift. So humans do go through these cycles of renewal. And I think it's really important to remember that we have, on average, 5 careers over a lifetime, not jobs. Totally different careers. And so I think people oftentimes get stuck like, I've chosen to be an accountant. That's all I'm going to do. No, you're probably going to be at least 3 other things before you retire. So I think when we can normalize that, and I guess that's the benefit of this new economy, the gig economy, is there's more opportunities to kind of shift and change. We're not stuck in our parents' generation where you literally worked for 30 years and you retired from the same company. So I think there's more freedom now, but I think sometimes freedom can cause distress because it's like too many options, right? Mm-hmm. So I think working with a coach can be really helpful. That's one of the things I recommend, but also just spending time reflecting. There's a lot you will learn about yourself. Just spending a little time reflecting, you'll find the answers.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and so I guess the question I would have is, like, in the workplace, if you're trying to create environments that are connected, that create opportunities for people to find that purpose and meaning in what they're doing, like, what are managers to do? What are leaders to do in order to help create those spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a whole chapter for managers and also a whole section for senior leaders in terms of kind of their role in creating meaningful work in their organizations. And then, of course, each of us as employees has our own role that we have to play. But for managers, a couple things. One is talking about the purpose of the organization. Most organizations are trying to achieve something, and yet oftentimes in the day-to-day work, there's a disconnect. So managers can do a better job of highlighting customer success stories, talking about the vision and the mission of the organization, highlighting how the work that this team is doing is contributing to that. NASA, had this famous moment when John F. Kennedy declared that we'd send a man on the moon. Even the janitors felt like they were contributing to that they were part of that vision and mission, that was part of their job, was to send someone to the moon. So we really want people to own that, and that happens in the translation that the managers do every day. Another thing is to get to know your people and ask them what gives them purpose and meaning. Oftentimes, if you can have these conversations with your employees, you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, if I swap a couple things from these two people's jobs, they're both going to be a lot happier. And so it gives you more information to help job craft a little bit and look for opportunities that would be meaningful for folks. And then the other thing is relationships. It turns out what gives a lot of us a sense of purpose and meaning in work is that we like our coworkers, that we enjoy working with this group of people. And so managers play a vital role in really helping build those relationships. Harder now with a lot of people remote, still totally possible. You just have to lean into it more. Harder to do on Zoom than in person. But we really need to over-index on helping people get to know each other and team build and find those places of trust and common shared things that they like, right? One of the researchers who studies trust in work is Paul Zak, and I love this quote. He says, "Joy on the job comes from doing purpose-driven work with a trusted team." And so we want to make sure that purpose is clear, but we also want to help teams build trust with each other, because that's the other part of the secret sauce.
This idea of a purpose-driven organization, I just love even just the collection of those words together. But I know you've spoken about this in the past, and there's this idea that this is likely going to become the norm. First, I'm just kind of curious, your interpretation of that, and why you think that's going to be the norm, and why is that so important?
Yeah, there's a couple things happening. So first of all, there's a whole body of scholars that study human consciousness. And consciousness is evaluated, they label it with colors. And there is a continuum of consciousness, but we are raising consciousness. Humans are getting more and more conscious. And the higher you go up in consciousness levels, the more you care about the collective, the more you see the interconnection of things, the more you start to realize that we're all in the same boat and that we're all contributing to something. So human consciousness has been measured as rising over the last couple hundred years, and it's really accelerated in the last 20 or so. So human consciousness is going to push organizations to be purpose-driven, because humans are the consumers and the workers at these organizations. There's a couple other researchers that are studying this transition. Frederick Laloux, he wrote Reinventing Organizations. And then Raj Sisodia has also written several books on conscious organizations. His latest one, The Healing Organization, is talking about profit-driven, purpose-driven, and now even focused on healing the world in significant ways. So there's a lot of evidence about it. If you want to dig more into the evidence, I encourage you to kind of read some of these works, but there is a clear shift that's happening. And when we look at the values of millennials, Gen Z, and Gen X, or Gen Alpha, there's a real strong push. The two things they really, really care about are the environment and social equality. And so those are going to be the drivers. And the research is really clear. They purchase based on that. They decide where to apply and where to work based on that. If once they're working there, they realize that there's some BS happening, they will call it out. They will use social media. So this this tone is not going to go away. It's going to increase. But the good news is for organizations that if they lean into being purpose-driven and they care about their social responsibility and they focus on their environmental impact, it's going to pay off for them. They're going to have more loyal consumers. They're going to have employees that stay. McKinsey just did a huge global study about purpose-driven organizations, and they found that employees who say they can live their purpose at work 6.5 more times more likely to report higher resilience, 4 times more likely to report better health, 6 times more likely to want to stay at the company, and 1.5 times more likely to go above and beyond to make their company successful. That all pays off for all the shareholders and the stakeholders. Deloitte did another study. They found 30% higher levels of innovation, 40% higher employee retention compared to the competitors. And they went on to state purpose-driven companies witness higher market share gains and grow 3 times faster on average than their competitors, all while achieving higher workforce and customer satisfaction. So there's really no downside to it. We just have to get past whatever myths or resistance people have thinking that it's a waste of time, but we're headed there anyway. I just think that senior leaders, executives need to lean into this and really drive their organization in this direction as fast as they can.
Beautiful. I'd love to get a hold of some of that research. That sounds really compelling. So I guess like the last question, well, 2 last questions for you. How do you find purpose and meaning in the work that you do?
Great question. It turns out that the golden thread in my life has always been about helping people achieve their potential. So as long as I'm doing that in some way, I'm a pretty happy camper. I feel really blessed that I have found this work where I can bring this scientific lens and also give people really actionable tools. I now build training that organizations use. So I'm working with a lot of global companies and bringing these principles and these practices to their workplaces. So I feel very, very fortunate. I get to do this work and I get to see an immediate impact regularly, and I get to hear really wonderful compliments. So I feel so just grateful that that is my career path now. It wasn't always rosy and sunny. I've definitely been under a couple bosses that were threatened by me and smushed me and made life really painful and awful. I've had some disappointments, but the thing is always, in hindsight, I've gone kicking and screaming into every blessing that I've had. And I think the wisdom that you get as you age is you start to realize I should maybe stop kicking and screaming. Maybe this is a good thing that's happening. And you commented that that's something that you're noticing with your clients as well.
It's a powerful place to end right there. So, Britt, if people want to find more about you, if they want to get any of your number of books, or if they want to be in touch with you, what's a good place to point people to?
Thank you. I've got 2 websites, my personal website, brittandreotta.com, my name. And then if people are interested in brain-based training, my company, Brain Aware Training, that's the website. You'll find my books wherever books are sold. There's 4 of them right now in the Wired 2 series. The one we're talking about, if you want to dig in on any of the things I said today, is Wired to Become. And also I love to be connected with people on LinkedIn and Instagram. So those are places people can find me.
Well, that's great. Well, I'll definitely be jumping on. Actually, I think we're already connected on LinkedIn, but I'll definitely be following your work. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing out there in the world and for helping to inspire other people to find purpose and meaning in their own work and lives. Hopefully we get a chance to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, and best of luck to you and everyone who listened today. I know you all are busy, and I hope this brought you some value.